So it's one of these serious videos where we sit down so we can talk about it with the gravitas that it deserves. And before you get mad, we're not picking fun at the Dudley Boyz here. This is a series. You can go back in time right now, or maybe even click a card that popped up on the screen here on YouTube, where we did it for Kurt Angle. We're just trying to figure out who is the best and who maybe not is the best when it comes to wrestling. You can be more poetic than that. It was all based around Bret Hart's autobiography, which you should most definitely read, where he had a system to come up whether a sports entertainee or entertainer was good or not, and he looked at in-ring ability, looked at promos, and he looked at look, which is another stupid sentence, and he ranked them out of 10. So again, Hulk Hogan, he gave a 10 out of 10 on promo ability, and in-ring, I think he gave a 3, although he was very self-reflective as well. In-ring, he gave himself a 10, and I think promo ability, he went 3 or 4, or something like that, which I personally think is too low. Now, we have thrown some other attributes in there as well, and yeah, given that the internet decided they were going to focus on Bubba Ray and D-Von to try and figure out if they were a legendary tag team, well, I sat down, Simon Miller with the WhatCulture team, basically trying to figure it out. As always, it's just an opinion. You're going to have one of your own. And let's start off with the good stuff in the sense that there is no team in the history of professional wrestling that are more decorated than the Dudley Boyz, because they won championships all over the place, and they're in the WWE Hall of Fame. Now, I know some people like to go, oh, but everybody's in the WWE Hall of Fame. That is not true. I don't think we always need to be such negative Nancy's. It's an incredible achievement, and at the very least, the Dudley Boyz deserve it. I mean, the longevity alone is something you have to give a round of applause to, but also do not forget their finishing move, the 3D, which Bubba Ray and D-Von also went out of their way to protect. I think it was only the Motor City Machine Guns that kicked out of it. I could be wrong about that, but the fact I have to think about it goes to show from day one till day end, they said, listen, this is our big maneuver, and if you are going to kick out the 1-2, we are going to make it mean something. And how many times we had that discussion in 2025? It's almost silly to call finishing moves. And I just finished watching a John Cena match. He hit 4 AAs. So I'll start mainly with the look and the presence. And I think the Dudley Boyz did this very well, because as soon as I said their name, I bet you can picture them in your mind, and they were probably wearing that camouflage. Now, no, camouflage is not brand new to professional wrestling, but they sort of made it a little bit black and white, and they absolutely took an idea and they made it their own, and that is massively important. It's why Vince McMahon used to tell his wrestlers, you must do your entrance in the same way over and over again, because he wanted to plant memories in your brain. Now that is stupid, because wrestling is a story-based form of entertainment, so if you got beaten up on a Sunday, you shouldn't be skipping to the ring on a Monday. When it comes to the Dudley Boyz and the stuff that they wore and the way they acted, I suppose, they absolutely made you go, I know who they are. But don't forget, even when they first started off, they were essentially meant to be hillbillies, and Bubba Ray especially, well, and D-Von actually, wore those massively thick glasses, and they must have first started doing that in the late 90s, which is almost 30 years ago. So I think that makes my point quite nicely. Now, better than all of this is that Bubba Ray and D-Von looked like they could kick your ass, and that actually helped with their promos, because while Bubba could obviously go, if he was in the best cosmetic shape you'd ever seen a wrestler ever being in, he wouldn't have been able to look at the fans and go, ha ha ha, you look like an absolute idiot, you look like you've barely ever seen a treadmill, where of course the same things could be thrown back to him. Now, this goes down into a completely different pro wrestling argument. Just because somebody looks like they don't hit the gym doesn't mean that, one, they don't go to the gym, because they probably do, but of course they have a gas tank for days. When it comes to wrestling, you want to make sure that every single person is a different shape and a different size, otherwise it gets really boring. So I get so damn mad when people say, oh, Kevin Owens is out of shape. No, he's not, bro. I've seen him wrestle matches that go over 40 minutes. Do you know how much cardio you need to do that? Stop being silly. The point is this, Bubba Ray and D-Von wanted to look like they could kill you, and they absolutely did. It also helped that D-Von had more of a solid physique, and given that a lot of their most iconic matches, which we are going to talk about, were them just totally breaking into, well, yeah, as soon as they did walk down the aisle, even a brand new wrestling fan would be able to go, I wouldn't want to mess with those guys, probably going to get in a little bit of trouble. So let's talk about that as well, what they were able to do in the ring. And yes, if you were going to cite many of their famous matches, you would probably go to the TLC matches, the ladder matches, the tables matches, and all these kind of stipulation matches where they were absolutely brilliant, which brings us to WrestleMania 17. Now, obviously, we have to bring in Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys too, but what they did with that tables, ladders, and chair stipulation completely changed the industry forever. And as I sit here right now in October 25 talking to you, there are upcoming wrestlers that still talk about that match and say, well, I really would like to raise the bar even higher. And there's a positive and negative to that. But think how many people walk through the pro wrestling door and never even come close to leaving this kind of a mark. mean, it really says something about what they were able to do. Bubba 2 in that thing comes across like a violent man, and he goes crashing through 4 tables, so we understood that it was a give and take. And it was the same when they took on the Hardys in that tables match at the Royal Rumble 2000. And I often think you have to push these two things together, because going back to the whole raising the bar idea again, when these two matches were done, nobody was ever going to look at sports entertainment the same again, at least from a WWE mainstream North American angle, because nobody had seen anything like it. And you do have to have a certain amount of skill to pull that off. Like if I was thrown in there, probably be dead. That one at the Rumble 2 is an absolute sprint as well, with some near misses where you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that almost happened. So yeah, this kind of summarizes the Dudley Boyz' career, because if all of a sudden you watch this video and you decide, I'd love to go and watch one of their matches or a handful of their matches, you are going to go for the ones that have some kind of stipulation attached to them, because that was their lane. And how many times have you heard pro wrestlers say that as well? If you have found something you're good at, push your strengths and hide your weaknesses. So in no means am I calling this a criticism, and in fact, it's an absolute plus. They figured out what they were good at, and they lent into it. Now, of course, they could work straight tag team matches as well, and they did this a lot, but this is when the debate comes into play. Did they make as much noise as the alternative as what they were doing? And I would imagine that most people would say no, probably not. Now, if we use Cage Match to try and give us a little bit of insight into this, their highest ranked non-crazy match was in May 2004 on SmackDown, where they were taking on Rey Mysterio and RVD. Now, I didn't actually get round to watching this, but I don't remember it, and I'll hazard a guess you probably don't remember it either. There is a caveat to that, however, because given that they were in WWE for a large part of their career, well, during that period, it was a tag team division booked by a man that didn't like tag team wrestling, and of course I'm talking about Vince McMahon. So you would just go from feud to feud to feud to feud, and nothing was really ever able to land, or you couldn't really ink anything out, apart from the programs we've already talked about, and a lot of the time it was just, listen, tag team wrestling exists, so we may as well just do some tag team wrestling. Even then, though, the Dudley Boyz shined the most when they were able to do brawling, which sums up why they made such a name for themselves in ECW, although I guess you kind of have to throw an asterisk in there as well, because Extreme Championship Wrestling loved going off the rails. D-Von and Bubba clearly loved going off the rails too. That's just what they did. They were a proper tag team though, which is something that was sorely missed from this era, in the sense so many single stars just got thrown together. So to have matching clothes, to have a bunch of double team moves, you can hear it in your ear right now, Jim Ross saying, oh my gosh, they've got that synchronicity, or whatever that flipping word he used to say was. D-Von would also be able to fly through the air, which was very impressive for a man of his size. And actually, if you go through their entire career, they were always near the tippity top. And it's also fair to say there were times where they were doing a lot of nothing as well, mostly because there was nothing for them to do. They just hung out in the corner playing Nintendo. Bubba himself, though, has come out and said that wrestling isn't always about the wrestling matches, and he is true. But I would still say that when Bubba Ray and D-Von were able to attach themselves to something that did have higher stakes, well, that's where their best bits shone through. It means that overall, when it comes to in-ring and everything like that, I am going to give them a 7 out of 10. And I mean this literally a 7 out of 10. So not a 5 out of 10, which people do in video games. They go, oh man, 7 must be average. No, I mean a 7 out of 10, which is meant to be a very good score. They were above average, right? I'm repeating myself, but that's the point I'm trying to get across. It's kind of the same with promos too, and if you do go back to when the Dudley Boyz debuted in WWE, you'll probably remember this. We gave Bubba Ray a stuttering gimmick, so when he was on a microphone, he would go duh, 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 which was absolutely ridiculous and of course slightly offensive, especially by 2025 standards. And arguably the most famous thing that came from this is when he was cutting a promo on The Rock, and The Rock did the same thing to him and went duh, 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 it doesn't matter. And he whooped his ass. That was quite funny. And that was never going to go on forever because it had a very specific shelf life. And it was also kind of stupid because Bubba Ray Dudley, when it came to cutting promos, was a dude that had one thing in mind, especially when he was a heel. I am going to rile the audience up, and the madder they get, the happier I am going to be. D-Von was a less is more guy, but always put that full stop on the sentence. And listen, I'll give them their credit here as well. If they wanted to get people amped up for a fight, or at least believe, oh my gosh, I think they're actually mad, they knew what they were doing. Now in ECW, it was this times 10, and some people got so angry, they once actually spat on Bubba Ray, and now somebody out there will go, but in the 70s, people were trying to stab other wrestlers, but times move on, even being spat on in the late 90s is quite the feat. Now, I will be completely honest with you. During his Extreme Championship Wrestling days, for me personally, in my taste, Bubba Ray went way too far. It was way too vile. And again, you could say, oh, Simon, you're such a wuss, but I can only like what I like and hate what I hate. And you'll be able to determine how you feel about it as well. It's just, well, I'll go back to what I always say. I don't think anybody would allow to be out of these words today. However, the plus point to all of that, though, is that it proved that Bubba Ray Dudley did know his audience, and he tried to manipulate that That's the sign of a good professional wrestler. The thing is though, when it came to this overall, Bubba was more, I'm going to say this right into your face kind of a guy, and I'm not going to hold back. So even though he could go to any kind of city or any kind of town or any country in the world and elicit some kind of response, but if I was going to ask you right now to recite a Bubba Ray promo, well, you probably wouldn't be able to do it. At the same time, though, he was meant to be a street-fighting ass kicker, so if all of a sudden he was being poetic or coming out with lines where we went, oh man, that's really clever, I don't think that would have linked up with his personality. He was so damn effective when he was on his own in TNA, Bubba Ray essentially reached the main event level of the card, because once again, he was super duper good at getting heat. We've already mentioned that whole thing that happened at ECW Heatwave 1999, but I am going to tell you before I get to my score, this is a personal thing for me. It does go down just a little bit because of, yes, well, the only word I can think of is the vileness. That makes me sound like an old man. But listen, if you asked me to quote some of the things he did say right now, I wouldn't do it. I'm a baby. And sure, many people always go, well, anyone can do that with the right tone of voice, but that argument to me is the same. This Batman game wouldn't be good if Batman wasn't in it. Batman was in it, and Bubba Ray found this tone of voice, and he was able to audibly get it out there to achieve his wants. I really don't think that everybody has the power to do that, otherwise people that are dubbed bad promos would just go into that lane. So once again, I think it's a solid 7 out of 10. Please, for the love of everything, focus on that word solid. Now, another metric that's always fun to throw in there as we do kind of go outside of all of this is, does somebody want to watch them in 2025? I would say absolutely yes. Be it WWE or AEW, you still get fans going, we want tables. And that was essentially the Dudley Boyz' entire gimmick for a few years. Bubba would actually say to D-Von, hey D-Von, get the tables. And everybody would get crazy, and then yeah, they'd throw somebody through some wood. They didn't invent the table madness because of course that goes to Sabu, and even at ECW, it was the tag team known as the Public Enemy that was going crazy with this stuff. But the Public Enemy nowadays, I'm not sure are remembered by many, whereas the Dudley Boyz are the tables tag team, so that has to be a tick in the well done column. Once again, it comes down to longevity. There's actually an even bigger plus point in WWE, even though you can see using weapons as a get out of jail free card. But because the crowd, especially from around about 2002, wanted to see tables all the time, and they got tables all the time, the Dudleys were still able to get a pop, even though they also used tables. I mean, that doesn't even make sense as I say it out loud. It is 2 + 2 = potato, but they found the gimmick, they found their thing, and they were able to make that even bigger as they did grow in popularity. And I don't think that's easy in wrestling, especially because sometimes the audience can change like the wind. They're also sizable dudes too, so when they did do this, it looked devastating, and it kind of goes back to what we said earlier. Both Bubba Ray and D-Von were happy to go absolutely ballistic through tables themselves, and that's why, one of the major reasons, I would imagine a more modern day crowd would want to watch this. It looks like a car crash, man, and sometimes the wood quite literally explodes. Now, of course, we can flip reverse this and say when it comes to their normal fight, sure, you're probably going to go watch another tag team. But the fact you can take what they did in 2001 and make it somewhat relevant 24 years later, I'm going and I'm sticking to my favorite number. It's a 7 out of 10. Because it's still a massive thing to pull off, because Bubba Ray and D-Von had no idea what the future for tables in pro wrestling held. I mean, maybe in 2010 they would have been made illegal, and you can laugh at that, but you never know. In the past as well, we've also touched on cultural significance, and of course when we covered Kurt Angle, his Olympic success made sure he existed outside the wrestling bubble. And if you need a better example of that, I would just throw out The Rock. Everybody knows Dwayne Johnson, and it has nothing to do with pro wrestling. Now, I'm sure even Bubba Ray and D-Von would admit to this, but no, outside of sports entertainment, I doubt anybody knows who they are. But once again, I'm not saying that as a criticism. To be a badass wrestler that is really good at wrestling and stays in wrestling for almost 30 years, you should absolutely go Barra Horowitz and pat yourself on the back. I would, however, say they likely had a lot of influence on the people that were coming up, because we've already touched upon this. If you were in a tag team, or you were brothers, or pretending to be brothers, I suppose, and all of a sudden you saw them doing the things they were doing, it probably gave you a renewed sense of confidence, especially if maybe your in-ring wasn't as good as that of some of your peers. It was like, all right, well, I come up with a gimmick, I get my promos down, and I can just come across like an absolute beast. Well, there may be some success for me in this business. And now absolutely the Hardy Boys and the Christian have to be thrown in there as well, because of course they did do this as a unit. But let's go back to that first fact that we threw out there. The Dudley Boyz, and I'm gonna have to read this, otherwise forget it, are the only team to ever win the WWE, ECW, WCW, TNA, NWA, and IWGP World Heavyweight Tag Team titles. It essentially means any single company they went in, eventually the booker went, you know who should be the guys we put on the top of the tag team mountain. They're right there, and they're known as the Dudley Boyz. But that's an absolute home run, and they should be shouting about that till the cows come home. So I think once again, it's got to be a 7 out of 10. You're probably now going, Simon, this is so lame. Why do you keep going to the 7s? Well, because it all to me feels like a 7. If you disagree, you can put a comment in the comments. I've also stolen my own thunder here, but let's talk about rivalries. And yes, you go to Edge and Christian, and you go to the Hardy Boys, and I think you could probably sum this up in one single sentence. In terms of what they did do, it's just all time. I mean, not only did they legitimize tag team wrestling during a period where Vince McMahon didn't want to do that, but they changed the game. I think that's the 72nd time that I have said that. But just go and watch a ladder match or TLC matches didn't even exist before they did do this in 2000 and 2001. It was like all of a sudden it had changed overnight because they took such crazy risks. Now actually, to be fair, if you go back to ECW and watch their fights with Spike Dudley, you'll also be face-palming because you'll be like, oh my gosh, they're wrecking this guy. And you can even go to Heatweight 1997 and watch their absolutely insane cage match with the Gangsters. I mean, this kind of encapsulates anything. Sometimes they just did not care. Now, all of that helped wrestling in the late 90s in the direction it was going to go in, but it wasn't all great. And TNA, I think around about 2007, they had to pretend to be electrocuted. Let's just move on. Now, there's a strange caveat when it comes to their feuds, because of course, at the height of the Attitude Era, Bubba Ray Dudley especially did have some odd ones with Trish Stratus and Mae Young. I'm sure you remember this. Not only did he powerbomb Trish Stratus through a table, but on another evening on Raw, him and D-Von wheeled, it's terrible, Mae Young to the ring and did the same to her. And yes, she was an 80-year-old woman. Now, Bubba Ray didn't celebrate this, like all of a sudden he won a championship. He just went into some kind of trance, like he couldn't believe he'd done it. The funniest part is D-Von feels like he has to do something, so he does the testify thing, as if Mae Young is dead. And listen, this was pitched as a feud. It was pitched as some kind of a rivalry. And whether you'd ever do it today, I do not know. But it has sort of made a bed in my memory, and I'm never going to be able to forget it. So what I'm going to do here, if we were just talking about the stipulation matches, I think it would be a 9 out of 10. When you sort of take everything into account, I think you could probably settle on a 6. The Dudley Boyz are also responsible for stopping the world on at least one occasion because, man, the first time they hit the 3D in ECW, well, actually, it didn't get a pop at all, mostly because I think most fans thought Spike Dudley was dead. It was the first attempt and he basically was dropped on his head, and that rhymes, so it must be true. But ever since that point, it genuinely became one of the best tag team finishes of all time. That one has to be a massive tick in the box. I mean, nobody had ever seen a double cutter like this, and they even got the setup down. And if you want to make such crazy statements like there would be no Shatter Machine without the 3D, well, this board idiot is totally going to agree with you. They also main evented One Night Stand in 2005 when they went against Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman. And all I'm going to tell you today is go and watch that. Again, they were at the tippity top of the show. They closed the damn thing, and it is one hell of an entertaining brawl. You also get flaming tables on that, which is probably why people have not forgotten it. And yes, third time I've talked about this, the Heatwave 1999 promo. Just go and watch it for yourself, but beware and don't say I didn't warn you. There's also the biggest one they were able to get in WWE, and you can say it with me so it's not so annoying. What's up? If you don't know what that is, Budweiser had a very successful commercial during this period, and fair play to Bubba Ray and D-Von. So many wrestlers have looked into pop culture and borrowed this stuff. And how they ever thought to do this, I don't know. But they would take their opponent, they would split their legs, D-Von would go to the top rope. When Bubba would look at D-Von and D-Von would look at Bubba, they would go, wafab, as D-Von just dove into that person's crotch. It sounds absolutely terrible when I was saying it, but long after that advert was dead, the Dudley Boyz were doing this and get a massive response from the crowd. So it's Santino Marella's Cobra, it's Mick Foley's Mr. Socko. They came up with something so simple that did stand the test of time. And for that, I applaud them forever. I mean, there are so many packed arenas you can see going crazy for this, so it is a feather in their cap. And it's so damn smart they came up to begin with. 7 out of 10. I think we can fly through range when it comes to the Dudley Boyz because I go back to what I said earlier. They came up with what they were good at and they mostly stuck to it, but in no way do I think that's a negative. In fact, in my own wrestling journey, so many people smarter than me have said the same old thing. Simon, if you know what you're good at, and that's what's getting a reaction from the fans, why the flub would you try anything else? I mean, it's why this isn't a perfect science at all, because you could even say the Road Warriors never really went out of what they were good at, but they still became one of the best tag teams ever. So I suppose you do have to give it a 5 out of 10. In this sense, I do mean that it was average. But that's also totally unfair, and I take that one, I throw it out the window. Wrestling just doesn't work that way. Interestingly, too, I would never say that Bubba Ray and D-Von were like specifically massive draws, like a Steve Austin or The Rock. But at the same time, you can go to so many peaks in certain companies, especially ECW and WWE, and they were an integral part of the roster. So if you want to describe them as being a massively integral part of the foundations or necessary for that structure, well, I think you make a very good point. And the only real evidence we do have about their main eventing in WWE was that Great American Bash 2004 event, when they did take on The Undertaker, and yeah, it did 238,000 buys, which was not good, but the stipulation was also, if the Dudley Boyz win, Paul Bearer was killed. That's just stupid. I mean, I wouldn't buy that now either, and it has nothing to do with the competitors. So I'll give it a 4 out of 10, but once again, that's a massively unfair number, especially because we talked about it. When they were in WWE, they had to fight uphill, because Vince McMahon didn't like tag team wrestling. Which does bring us to their overall, and I think more than anything else, I want to push the fact they have incredible longevity. Let's say the Dudley Boyz hit their mainstream peak in 1999, they were still involved 20 years later and getting massive return pops in like 2015. And that's quite frankly incredible. They're also part of the Attitude Era, which is one of the biggest times in all of professional wrestling. And while Bubba Ray can be one hell of a self-promoter, which you actually need to be successful in this business, there were absolutely some dips when they went to TNA. But then the counterpoint to that is do not forget how integral they were to the start of ECW. They really did help shift the idea of what tag team wrestling could be, though, and I think that's where their main legacy lies. Because if you put them in a locker room and you use them right and you allow them to be themselves, while also maybe toning them down just a little bit, they were always going to deliver the goods. And who couldn't they work with? And they were willing to destroy themselves for the game. So it just goes back to the number that I've come up with a lot, which is 7 out of 10. And the way I'm going to sum this up is by using video games once again. I understand these are different numbers, but some of my favorite games ever are 8 out of 10 games. And if somehow they all of a sudden became 10 out of 10 games, they wouldn't be as good. Now, I get that's a 2 plus 2 equals potato saying, and either you get it or you don't. It just means the Dudley Boyz out of 7, well, it does make them one of the best tag teams of all time. Argue it in the comments. At the same time, please do like the video, share the video, and subscribe, and click the video on the screen, which is me discussing the same for Kurt Angle, who arguably is one of the best wrestlers ever. But otherwise, my friends, remember, this is all opinions, and it doesn't really matter. I'll see you on the next one.